Hello and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, this is my first tutorial. I'm going to be doing it this time on save and loading your Unity game with JSON. And that will be anything from any data object you create. That can be a player's save data, your whole game's data, whatever you want, even just one number, you can save and load that as a JSON from your computer. So I basically pre-built this script in a small project, which, don't get too excited, looks like this, which is very simple. It just has a text input for, let's say, a player's name, a health incrementer and decrementer, so we can select what health that player may have been on when they're about to, end the game or whatever, their strength, and maybe the amount of inventory items they have. And we can take this a level further with the inventory items in a more advanced tutorial later. So now we've seen that, let's dive into a little bit of the code, because actually there's not that much which is required for this. The main thing is really kind of just understanding what's going on. At least that was it for me. Up here you can see I've just made a little class for our player save data. So these are the things that I actually want to save in our JSON. So that conversion is made quite simple. So as we saw in the project there, I have a text input for a name, so I'm going to save that as a string. I have a number for my health, a number for my strength, and the number of inventory items. So they're all integers. I'll leave all this down in the description below. Here is basically just a set of UI I'm using for the project. So that's just public variables, not too important for this right now. Here is the kind of the main thing here. We have the player data, which is of type our player save data object we've made. And this is kind of where everything will be stored. And what you'll actually be saving and loading into. So this is what you kind of want to be changing as the player is playing the game. There are two components, there's saving and loading. The main thing we want to do first is probably know how to save. So here you can see I've got a function called onApplicationQuit. This is read by Unity and basically runs when application is exited or removed or whatever. So this is primarily or usually when you want to save the game for the player. If you're running like an auto save or something, this is great for that. So if we move down here and see what this actually does, there are two main things we need to do. One is to define, where we want to save our data. And the second is what we're actually saving in this file. The easiest way to do this now is to create a string of file path, which is where we're going to save our data. And that's going to be a path which combines the application.persistent data path, which is very useful for us. We don't really need to know where that is or what that does. I mean, we do, but we don't have to. And then the file name, which is just what that file is going to be called. And up here, I've called that save data, as you can see. So the idea here is this is our file path to where we want to save our data and the file name we have for it. The next thing we need to do is turn our data, so our player object, into a format which can save into a text file or just a nice file with a low size. And this is where JSON is great because it does exactly that. So Unity has this great JSONUtility which we can use. And what this does is we just define our new string here, which is our save data, as a JSON, and then using this new utility we can convert this to JSON, and then you basically just put in your data of what's been being affected throughout the game, which is our player data. So the next thing we just need to do with this now is actually save it. So to do that, we can use file, which you import up here using system.io, file.write all text, where you want to write to, and the data, which is our nice long string as a JSON. That's kind of how we save. The next thing we need to think about is, okay, great, so now we have all of our data stored, how do we load it back in? And actually that's also just as simple, really. Again, we would find the same file path we did as when we saved, so we know where we're going to get the data from, or the file. And so we have that here. One great thing you can do on a load to make sure if it's the user's first load or if they actually have that data is run a file.exists and then put in the file path string of where that file is. Now, if that returns true, we know that the user has file saved data already. So what we can do is create a string which is data is JSON and basically just read all the text from that file, which gives us that JSON. The next thing we can do now is take our object, which we've been running out throughout the game as the player save data, and then load that in from JSON. Then you plug in the object you want to load it into, and then the data is JSON string we have, which means now the data we saved into player data should now be straight back into that object when the game starts. And here I've just run a name input.text equals player data.name to kind of visually show on the UI that that's happening. If you wanted to do that differently, or in a more structured way, you could just do a quick function. If I can type load player name, what we can do here is just put that there. And that does the exact same thing. It's just if you need to load more things, or perhaps it's just a little bit neat for people to read, and you don't really kind of want to contaminate that one load function with regards to the file with all this other UI stuff. So that just keeps that nice and clean. Another great thing about this is if this file doesn't exist else, then we save, which basically means, okay, it doesn't exist, let's generate a file for that user. And we can see that here now. So here is my application persistent path, and here is the project. So let's test this out now. So if we click play, we should, on our first time, get a piece of save data here. Now if we open this up and look inside, we can see that this is simply our object with our name, health, strength, and inventory items as our text JSON. Notice how everything is empty or set to their initial values, as we haven't changed anything yet. So let's do that. Let's close that up. Type in the name, let's go Henry. Let's give, so our character had a health of 8 before the end of the game. Their strength stat was, I don't know, 13 or 12, and they had 5 inventory items in the inventory. Okay, so great. Now let's just quit that. And if we open this back up again, we can see that great. We now have that object which we had up here. We now know that when we've put that into our object here, that has gone back into the JSON, which is great. So we now see all of these in here. Now the main thing to check next is whether or not this loads back into the game with our new function. So let's click play. And boom, there we go. Our name has loaded back in when we loaded. And for these values here, I have a quick little update here, which basically just turns that text to our player data.health. And then as you can see, when I've been incrementing and decrementing, just a small function which either adds one to this or takes it away. I hope that's a nice intro to save data in JSON and Unity. My first video, so there will be more coming. If you want things to go a little bit more in depth, let me know. If you want things to be a little bit smoother, let me know. A little bit lighter. I'm still just trying this out, so any feedback is appreciated.